The story begins with Hyun-soo, a poor and lonely homebody who has just moved into a new apartment. He narrowly avoids having his head chopped off by the building's partially deaf security guard, who shows no remorse for his actions. Hyun-soo, used to being bullied, doesn't say much. After all, he moved here to end his life. On the rooftop, Hyun-soo prepares to step off when he hears a sound behind him. Turning around, he sees a middle-aged woman practicing ballet. Her elegant movements momentarily distract him from his purpose. Suddenly, the dancing woman named Eun-yu slips on bird droppings. She glares at Hyun-soo, who quickly shakes his head. She tells him to go die somewhere else, as life in this apartment is hard enough. Back downstairs, Hyun-soo notices the security guard peeking into his room. The guard claims to be delivering an application form, but Hyun-soo brushes him off and locks the door. Peering through the peephole, he sees the guard staring unnervingly with wide eyes. Hyun-soo encounters more strange residents in the apartment. A guitar girl named Ji-soo, who has been practicing for 2.5 years without a single performance. A mother pushing a stroller who praises her baby, though Ji-soo notices there's nothing inside. She avoids sharing the elevator with her. A fellow resident explains that the mother lost her child in a car accident last year and hasn't recovered. The man, who is overly friendly and constantly talks about his faith, makes Ji-soo uncomfortable. After leaving the elevator, they encounter a scarred, tough-looking man named Sang-wook. This man is clearly not here on vacation. In one of the apartments, he is torturing someone, forcing a cigarette butt into their mouth despite their desperate pleas. Hyun-soo's other neighbor is a sociable woman obsessed with her cat and maintaining her figure, refusing to eat even a bite of food. Life in the apartment seems strange. One day, he receives a message from a delivery man. Opening the door, he finds his package already opened, with broken instant noodles scattered across the floor, leading to the room next door. When he goes to confront his neighbor, he witnesses a horrifying scene. A severed cat's head rolls out, followed by a bloody hand pulling it back inside. Terrified, Hyun-soo retreats to his room, locks the door, and hears the clicking of high heels outside, followed by the doorbell ringing. The woman's trembling voice carried a desperate plea for help. Hyun-soo approached the door and saw his beautiful neighbor from next door. She claimed that her home had been ransacked, leaving it in a bloody mess, and begged to be let in to hide. Hyun-soo wanted to call the police, but his phone only sent out sharp static noises. Hesitant yet concerned, he prepared to open the door. However, he suddenly recalled the bloody hand that had grabbed the cat's head earlier. He asked the neighbor to show her hands through the peephole. Hearing this, the neighbor stopped pretending. The beautiful woman began violently pounding on the door, her nostrils gushing blood. Suddenly, loud music blasted from the guitar girl's apartment upstairs. Summoning his courage, Hyun-soo opened the door but found only a blood-stained floor. When he asked the scar-faced man downstairs if he had seen a blood-covered woman, he fainted before getting an answer. Meanwhile, the guitar girl was interrupted mid-song by knocking on her door. She assumed she had disturbed her neighbors with her music and immediately went to apologize, only to find a wrinkled woman with a sharp, screechy voice crying, "I'm so hungry." The woman began violently slamming against the door. Terrified, the guitar girl thought, "Is my music really that bad?" The sturdy metal door bent under the woman's relentless assault. Only when the banging stopped did the guitar girl dare to open the door. She encountered the scar-faced man, who was following a trail of blood. The red-dressed woman was gone, leaving only bloodstains and a broken window. The scene shifted to the apartment building's entrances, all of which had been locked. Panicked residents crowded together, desperate to escape, but no one's phone could make calls. All that came through was sharp, static noise. Breaking into the management office, they tried to use the landline, but it was also dead. A wig-wearing man named Yoon-hyuk rummaged through the office and found a switch for the metal shutters. When the shutters rolled up, they revealed a creature with an unnaturally long tongue. A tall man broke into the apartment, and the creature's tongue lashed out, grabbing a random resident. With horrifying, squelching sounds, the victim was shredded to pieces. When the creature targeted its next victim, Eun-hyuk blocked it with a fire extinguisher. The creature seemed terrified of the extinguisher's powder, retreating in fear. At the bespectacled man's command, the older man pressed the button to close the door. The shutter door began to lower, but just then, the fire extinguisher's powder ran out. Without the deterrent, the monster re-entered the apartment. At this critical moment, a swift woman charged at the monster like the wind, knocking it out of the building. Eun-hyuk immediately supported the falling shutter door. However, the monster's tongue swept across the woman's calf, leaving a 1-meter-long wound. Ignoring her injury, the woman crawled forward, and just in time, Eun-hyuk pulled her back into the apartment. Almost simultaneously, the monster's long tongue slipped through the gap in the shutter, stopping just 3.5 centimeters from the woman's eye. Thankfully, the tongue was blocked by the shutter. Unable to reach its target, the long-tongued monster had no choice but to retreat. The two survivors, shaken but alive. Seeing the monster leave, other hiding residents began to cautiously emerge. The older man with the wig man complained about the government's incompetence, unable to handle even one monster. Looking out, they could see monsters, creatures reveling in the night. The few surviving humans had been dragged off by monsters, leaving no other signs of life. The apartment was completely surrounded by monsters. Hyun-soo, waking up to the apocalyptic view outside his window, suddenly experienced a severe nosebleed. Because the elevator was out of order, Eun-yu had to take the stairs. While descending, she suddenly heard footsteps from above. Panicking, she twisted her ankle and tumbled down the stairs. As the footsteps grew closer, she realized it was a fierce-looking older man. The man wasn't one of the apartment's residents. Seeing his stern and demeanor, she quickly assumed he wasn't a good person. Pretending to rest, she picked up her phone and casually told him to leave. However, his piercing gaze made her uneasy. Suddenly, a red figure lunged at the man from behind, biting deeply into his shoulder. Blood poured onto the floor. Horrified, Eun-yu jumped up, but the fierce older man lived up to his reputation. He grabbed the red ghost by the hair and slammed it to the ground. Without flinching, he glanced back at his shoulder, where a large chunk of flesh had been ripped off. The red-clad ghost tried to launch another attack but was caught by the man, who single-handedly choked it. He brushed aside its bangs to reveal a scar on its forehead. The ghost was the very door-crashing ghost he had been hunting. Wasting no time, the man punched the ghost, then hurled it against the wall. The ghost, crumpled on the floor, tried to resist, but the man delivered a powerful kick, embedding it into the wall. Amid Eun-yu's screams, the man continued his relentless assault, kicking the ghost deeper and deeper into the wall until it was firmly stuck. Terrified, Eun-yu stared at the older man. The next morning, Hyun-soo, who had been unconscious, began experiencing severe nosebleeds. Through the internet, he discovered that nosebleeds and fainting were precursors to turning into monsters. However, before he could find a solution, the internet went down. Starving, Hyun-soo decided to retrieve some instant noodles from outside his door. Thinking the ghost from yesterday was gone, he cautiously opened the door, only to encounter a terrifying long-eared monster with half a head. The monster entered his room, its sharp nails scraping the walls and its voice repeatedly murmuring, "I can't see." Terrified, Hyun-soo tried to stay silent but accidentally made a noise while reaching for a broomstick. The monster's sensitive hearing caught the sound, and its extended arms struck. Hyun-soo, trembling, had no choice but to hide. When the monster left, Hyun-soo, shaken but alive, resolved to maintain his humanity. Looking out the window, Hyun-soo saw a man using a rope to descend the building in search of rescue. However, a massive eye appeared beside him, causing the man to slip and fall to his death. The enormous eye then targeted 2 children nearby, forcing Hyun-soo to act. Despite his fear, he threw his computer monitor to distract the creature, drawing it toward himself. The creature broke through Hyun-soo's window and attacked, wrapping its snake-like body around him. Hyun-soo attempted to defend himself by stabbing the eye with a broomstick, but it had no effect. As the eye tightened, suffocating him, it suddenly collapsed. Hyun-soo looked outside and saw his neighbor, the engineer, wielding a homemade cannon that had severed the creature's body. The engineer warned Hyun-soo that the monsters were immortal, and sound would attract them. To protect 2 children on a lower floor, Hyun-soo decided to help. The engineer gave him an upgraded broomstick with an electrical modification, explaining that while electricity could harm the monsters, it wouldn't kill them. As soon as he stepped out, he encountered the wandering, long-eared monster. Hyun-soo tried to hide in the elevator, but a rotting, fishy stench inside attracted the monster. Cornered, Hyun-soo used the electrically modified broomstick to stun the monster, giving him a chance to escape. However, the long-eared monster could extend its limbs indefinitely and even split into multiple parts, making it extremely difficult to escape. With the monster closing in, Hyun-soo decided to fight back. He threw a bouncing ball to distract it, then snuck up and stabbed its head with the electrified broomstick. The high-voltage current caused the monster to tremble violently, smoke pouring from its mouth before it collapsed. Hyun-soo seized the moment to flee. Reaching the children's room, Hyun-soo reassured them about the food supplies in the engineer's room. Starving for 3 days, the siblings eagerly agreed to go with him. However, as they stepped out, Hyun-soo's symptoms worsened. His nose bled profusely, a clear sign of him turning into a monster. He instructed the children to head upstairs while he dealt with his condition. Blurry, Hyun-soo saw a vision of his tragic past and the bullying he endured. When he regained focus, his eyes had turned pitch black, and his humanity was gone. After completing her task in the basement, Jin-jae attempted to return to the first floor, but was dragged into a smoky corridor by a spider-like monster. When she awoke, she found herself ensnared in a web, hanging from the ceiling like prey. She spotted the security guard passing by with keys, but was left helpless as he chose not to rescue her. In the basement, the spider monster returned to its lair to find its prey missing, save for discarded clothing. Jin-jae had escaped into the ventilation ducts. Furious, the spider pursued her, but she used her agility to evade it in the narrow spaces. When she reached a dead end, she cleverly hid in a blind spot above the monster. After confirming its departure, she kicked open a vent to escape. The noise alerted the spider, which gave chase again. Jin-jae leapt down but was grabbed by its webbing. Using her body weight and quick thinking, she swung herself into a nearby window, smashing the glass. She slashed the web until it broke, narrowly avoiding being dragged back into the ducts. Injured and exhausted, she returned to the first floor of the apartment building, immediately punching Glasses Guy in the gut for knowingly sending her into a basement full of monsters. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo and his 2 companions decided to check the situation on the first floor. Passing the 9th floor, they discovered a freshly deceased body, but failed to notice a red glow flickering in the shadows. Suddenly, Hyun-soo was struck and thrown down the stairs, tumbling all the way to the first floor and scattering groceries. His fall startled Eun-yu, who was knocking on the first floor door. When Hyun-soo regained consciousness hours later, Eun-yu and Glasses Guy were by his side. Remarkably, Hyun-soo had fully healed within 2 hours. Despite his recovery, Glasses Guy proposed a vote among the residents to decide whether Hyun-soo should leave. The selfish, wig-wearing man supported banishment, but his behavior drew widespread disrespect. Ultimately, the vote ended in a tie, 8 votes for, 8 against, and 1 refusal. Furious, the wig-wearing man argued that infected individuals like Hyun-soo weren't human and deserved immediate expulsion. Yet he failed to consider that anyone could be the next to transform. Ironically, as he ranted, blood began pouring from his nose, a clear sign of infection. Karma had come swiftly. Faced with the reality of his infection, the man joined Hyun-soo in the makeshift quarantine cell. He shamelessly asked Hyun-soo how he managed to resist full change. Hyun-soo, unsure how he managed to resist fully changing, suggested to the wig-wearing man that staying conscious might help. Meanwhile, Jin-jae discovered she was pregnant. Later in the evening, as Jin-jae took a shower, she interrupted by footsteps behind her. Annoyed, Jin-jae quickly grabbed a piece of clothing and used it as a weapon, subduing the would-be peeper in just 3 seconds. The man, realizing he was caught, refused to answer any questions about his team or mission. When a voice from his walkie-talkie broke the silence, the man panicked, throwing the device away. The mocking voice on the other end revealed the man's true nature. "It's revealed the gangs." Jin-jae instantly understood the situation and smashed the walkie-talkie with a fire extinguisher, recognizing that the immediate threat was to limit exposure to the military. The task of handling the mission fell to Hyun-soo and the ruthless uncle. As they were about to leave the building, They saw a security guard who had been hiding somewhere earlier. The guard entered the elevator, but Hyun-soo couldn't stop it from going down. Inside, the guard had completely changed into a monster. With no other choice, Hyun-soo and Sang-wook took the stairs, but the alarm systems on the stairwell became an obstacle. Suddenly, a rotting monster grabbed Sang-wook. Hyun-soo tried to help, but Sang-wook urged him to continue downstairs to help the others, as he could defend himself. Hyun-soo rushed down the stairs, but there were too many obstacles in his way. After thinking for 0.3 seconds, he jumped from the 18th floor, landing awkwardly and fracturing his leg. Even with Hyun-soo's near-immortal body, walking again would be difficult. Meanwhile, the mutated security guard reached the first floor and turned into a stinky fish monster. As the battle unfolded, a one-armed warrior called Faith Dove fought back, attempting to block the monster's flailing arms with a sword. However, Faith Dove's injuries were severe, and after one round he was overwhelmed, losing his sword and his arm. Despite the immense pain, Faith Dove struggled to stand, using his remaining strength to stab a broken knife into the monster's chest. Though he couldn't find his loved ones, he couldn't afford to wait. With a final push, he forced the monster into the elevator. As the elevator lights flickered, Faith Dove continued stabbing the creature, but he knew this wouldn't kill it. In a last-ditch effort, he pierced a fuel tank on the monster's back, causing a massive explosion. The fire covered both Faith Dove and the mutated guard. Watching this tragic scene, the survivors couldn't hold back their tears. The people who had fought so hard were now gone. With the building at risk of being exposed to the military, the elderly man suggested preparing an escape route, as buildings that had survived war usually had underground tunnels or bunkers. He trusted Jing-ji to survive and asked her to protect the children. Just then, an armored vehicle was spotted approaching the building. Despite there being no warning signals, the military appeared to have arrived. The elderly man, who understood war, knew that in chaotic times, soldiers couldn't be trusted. The armored vehicle smashed into the apartment's lobby, and a group of heavily armed soldiers disembarked, each carrying a silver box. Upon seeing the deserter, the leader wasted no time and stabbed him repeatedly. His subordinates took the half-dead deserter and, as part of their brutality, chopped off his thumb, using it to try and open a box. When that failed, the deserter tried to sneak away, but was caught by the leader and promptly executed. The survivors in the hall watched in silence, too scared to even breathe. These men were far more terrifying than any monsters. Within moments, the subordinates had gathered all the survivors into the hall. One of them drew a lipstick and drew a large circle on the floor. Before anyone could comprehend its significance, a girl standing outside the circle was shot and killed. The leader made it clear. Anyone who dared step outside the circle would die. For these military, people were worthless in times of chaos. Glasses Guy urged Hyun-soo to remain calm and not act rashly, as not everyone was invincible like him. They needed to wait patiently for help. Just then, the ruthless uncle emerged with a gun, taking two of the military's hostage. However, a small, alert military noticed the gun was not unlocked. Sang-wook knocked him out with a strong blow, while Jing-ji took advantage of the chaos, killing one military and snapping another's neck. Meanwhile, the gang's boss discovered the kind-hearted landlady hiding in a room, and without hesitation, had her killed, showing no remorse for ending the life of a human infected by the virus. As Jing-ji was rescuing survivors, she had to retreat when militaries pursued her. Suddenly, one of them was knocked down by a flower pot that fell from a nearby window. It was the ruthless uncle, who, with a child on his back, swiftly knocked out a military. He then shielded himself from another military's gunfire, using the body of one of their fallen comrades as cover. The military, thinking that having a gun made him invincible, was soon hit in the head with an axe thrown by Jing-ji. Another pair of military, chasing Jing-ji, thought they'd trapped her in a room. However, they were fooled by her shoes left under a table and only realized their mistake when they saw the iron door being pulled shut. Back in the lobby, while the leader scolded his subordinates for their failure, Glasses Guy used the distraction to grab him from behind. Hyun-soo quickly neutralized one military and held a gun to another's throat. Other survivors, seeing the situation shifting in their favor, also jumped in to fight back. The military, well-trained but growing desperate, attempted to retaliate. One tried to stab Hyun-soo in the abdomen, but he grabbed the blade with his bare hands. At the same time, the leader performed a shoulder throw on Glasses Guy. With the tables turned, the leader was about to execute Hyun-soo when, to everyone's shock, the landlady who they had thought was dead appeared alive. A military, unsure of the situation, fired several shots at her, but the landlady seemed unfazed. She instantly grabbed the military and stabbed him in the neck, revealing that she had transformed into a monster. The landlady's next target was Glasses Guy, who was standing nearby. The brutal scene left everyone in shock, especially as the landlady's arm pierced through Hyun-soo's body. Despite the immense pain, Hyun-soo fought back, managing to grab the landlady's throat, squeezing tightly with all her might. But it didn't take long before the landlady began falling to the ground, lifeless. The sight was a shock to all. As Hyun-soo fell, the gang leader observed his wounds and realized he was also a monster. Following his rule that all monsters must die, he set the landlady's body on fire to prevent her from resurrecting. He then carried the unconscious Hyun-soo into the elevator. Jing-ji, seizing the opportunity when only one military remains in the hall, attacks and kills him, planning to evacuate the survivors. However, she runs into another military who returns from his break. This military immediately takes a hostage and threatens Jing-ji, even shooting someone as a warning. To protect the survivors, Jing-ji reluctantly drops her weapon, but the military wastes no time, kicking her violently. Jing-ji curls up, trying to protect her stomach. The remaining survivors soon join in a struggle with the military, and in the final moments, Jing-ji manages to take down the military with a single shot to the head. With that, only 4 military remain on the rooftop. The cruel gang leader, Black Boss, has no intention of killing Hyun-soo directly. Instead, he plans to torture him before his death. However, Hyun-soo is equally determined. He shuts the door, preparing to end it all with the military above. Internal conflict erupts among the military, and the Black Boss is tossed out the window by one of his subordinates. As the young and handsome military turns around, he's shot in the neck, but in a twist, the bullet rebounds and kills the military who fired it. The handsome military is revealed to be another infected individual, like Hyun-soo. The final military, terrified, begs for his life, offering himself as a mere dog to the young man. At this moment, a helicopter flies overhead, dropping a number of red flyers. Picking one up, Hyun-soo finds it's a notice about special infected individuals. Confused, he wonders why they would kill their own kind. However, Hyun-soo believes that there are monsters who won't harm others, such as the giant baby mother who has transformed. This leads him to question whether there are people who won't hurt monsters. A special notice is posted, encouraging people to report special infected individuals. Hyun-soo and Amin return to the hall, and the remaining survivors are initially relieved to see that Hyun-soo is still human. But Hyun-soo stands with Amin, threatening the others not to harm his friend. Amin shares his past experience, revealing that he once thought monster transformation was a disease, so he volunteered for military experiments. Meanwhile, a selfish young man secretly sabotages the signal transmitter of Jing-ji. Suddenly, a crisis occurs. Eun-hyuk collapses, and the tall man needs to take her outside to find medicine. However, as soon as they leave, Eun-hyuk is shot. Amin is revealed to be the one behind the gunfire, and he starts indiscriminate looting at the survivors. Jing-ji's group opens fire to stop Amin, but the bullets have no effect on him due to his special infection. In the chaos, Hyun-soo tries to stop Amin, but his efforts fail. Amin explains that he always knew Hyun-soo wasn't on his side and reveals that Hyun-soo never killed anyone. The true mastermind behind the deaths was Amin, who had controlled the boss lady. The people Hyun-soo thought he had killed were actually victims of Amin's manipulation. Hyun-soo's transformation begins when a solar eclipse occurs. His body twists violently, and his arm becomes a black wing covered in sharp blades. He walks toward Amin, and his wings pierce Amin's body, killing him within seconds. However, Hyun-soo doesn't return to normal but continues to walk toward those he has protected. Just as he is about to strike Eun-yu and others, the engineer, now fully mutated, intervenes and holds Hyun-soo back, causing him to retract his wings and return to his original form. But the engineer dies from his injuries, along with the tall man and Eun-hyuk. When Hyun-soo awakens, he appears to have lost his memory. Forgetting the engineer, Hyun-soo sits alone in a corner of the apartment, contemplating his planned suicide, while Eun-yu, who has grown fond of him, silently weeps. The night passes without sleep, and an elderly person dies peacefully in their sleep, but not before revealing a hidden tunnel in the apartment that could help everyone escape. Amin, who was thought to be dead after being reduced to a pool of blood, surprisingly survives and secretly drives away in an armored vehicle. That night, a heavily armed military surrounds the apartment, demanding the surrender of the special infected. Though Hyun-soo has lost his memory, he knows he must leave. Eun-yu urges him to stay, insisting that no one would betray him here. Just then, a group of robbers triggers an explosion in the tunnel, and the military believes they've discovered weapons, prompting them to attack the apartment. Amid the chaos, Jing-ji and the glasses-wearing man organize the survivors to escape through the tunnel. However, after a while, Eun-yu notices that Hyun-soo is missing. She wants to go back to find him, but the glasses-wearing man stops her, promising to help locate Hyun-soo. Despite her worries, Eun-yu reluctantly trusts him. Meanwhile, the glasses-wearing man is alone in a room, staring at a photo of a family. Suddenly, images of Hyun-soo, whose eyes are pitch black, appear, and he walks alone out of the apartment. He faces the military amidst gunfire, his lost memories gradually returning. In the snow, he stands before the cold muzzle of a gun, having wandered through the tunnel for 29 hours with the other survivors. They finally find an exit, but as soon as they emerge, they are surrounded by the military. Hyun-soo and Amin return to the hall, and the remaining human. But Hyun-soo stands with Amin, threatening the others not to harm his friend. Amin shares his past experience, revealing he thought monster transformation was a disease, so he volunteered for military experiments. The survivors are tempted. Meanwhile, a selfish young man, Hyun-soo quickly recognized him as Ani, whom he had previously killed. Ani returns with the tough man's appearance after possessing his body. Eun-hyuk collapses, and the tall man needs to take her outside to find medicine. However, as soon as they leave the apartment, Eun-hyuk is shot. Amin is revealed behind the gunfire, and he starts indiscriminate shooting at the survivors. Jing-ji's group opens fire to Amin, but the bullets have no effect on him due to his special infection. In the chaos, Hyun-soo tries to stop Amin, but his efforts fail. Amin explains that he always knew Hyun-soo wasn't on his side and reveals that Hyun-soo never killed anyone. The truth of Amin's manipulation. Hyun-soo's transformation begins when a solar eclipse occurs. His body twists violently, and his arm becomes a black wing covered in sharp blades. He walks toward Amin, and his wings pierce Amin's body, killing him within seconds. However, Hyun-soo doesn't return to normal but continues to walk toward those protected. Just as he is about to strike Eun-yu and others, the engineer, now fully mutated, intervenes and holds Hyun-soo back, causing him to retract his wings and return to his original form. But the engineer dies from his injury. When Hyun-soo awakens, he appears to have lost his memory, forgetting the engineer and the other survivors. In this segment, Hyun-soo sits alone in a corner of the apartment, contemplating his planned suicide, while Eun-yu, who has grown fond of him, silently weeps. The night passes without sleep, and an elderly person dies peacefully in their sleep, but not before revealing a hidden tunnel in the apartment that could help everyone escape. Amin, who was thought to be dead after being reduced to a pool of blood, survives and secretly drives away in an armored vehicle, surrounds the apartment, demanding the surrender of the special infected, while offering the others a chance to be transferred to safety camps. To attack the apartment. Amid the chaos, Jing-ji and the glasses-wearing man organize the survivors to escape through the tunnel. Meanwhile, in an abandoned mall, Sang-wook was helping Hyun-soo prepare for an upcoming encounter with other special infected. Sang-wook referred to them as new humans. Hyun-soo, nursing unhealed wounds, couldn't understand why Sang-wook had rescued him from the military. Sang-wook explained that it was to allow Hyun-soo to live freely, rather than regret being subjected to inhumane military experiments. However, Hyun-soo, who had been contemplating suicide, willingly volunteered for the experiments, hoping they would lead to a cure for humanity. He resented Sang-wook's disregard for innocent lives in pursuit of personal motives. Their argument was interrupted by a woman's scream echoing through the mall. She ran toward them, pursued by a creature covered in clothes. Sang-wook swiftly stepped in and handled the issue. The woman, shocked by his actions, realized he might be even more fearsome than the monsters themselves. The injured creature, enraged by its lost clothes, retaliated, but Sang-wook effortlessly dispatched it again, throwing its body down to the lower floor. Sang-wook then revealed that other new humans were being held at a military base, where Hyun-soo was originally destined. Sang-wook urged Hyun-soo to enter the base with dignity, rather than being treated like a caged animal. Sang-wook recounted his own horrific experience during experiments at the base, haunted by the sadistic smile of Dr. Lim. These memories blurred with flashbacks of a girl his body's previous owner had cherished, creating an internal struggle that left him disoriented. Attempting to regain control, Sang-wook inflicted pain on himself, trying to stay conscious. As his memories and reality clashed, Sang-wook lost control of a vehicle, swerving to avoid the vision of the girl. The car collided and overturned, leaving the scene in chaos. Hyun-soo, bruised, was the first to regain consciousness after the crash. Struggling to his feet, he saw Sang-wook trapped under the overturned car and turned to find a soldier sitting nearby with a completely broken leg. The soldier, in pain and terrified, yelled at Hyun-soo to stay away. He couldn't comprehend why special infected like him existed, or why they treated ordinary humans so ruthlessly, forgetting that he had been the one to shoot at his first. Unable to endure his agony, he begged Hyun-soo to end his life. For Hyun-soo, this marked his first time killing a normal human, a moment that would haunt him. Meanwhile, Sang-wook crawled out from under the car, his legs broken. To his horror, they didn't heal. Worse still, her essence couldn't escape the body he occupied, leaving him trapped. He frantically tried to switch bodies, but his powers had abandoned him. Hyun-soo mocked him, calling him a parasite discarded by the world. He declared that Sang-wook, without his powers, was pathetic and dependent on others for survival. Without another word, Hyun-soo dragged Sang-wook to the military base, determined to hand him over for experiments. Sang-wook, helpless and desperate, struggled against Hyun-soo's grip. He knew that returning to the lab in his current state meant certain death. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. Hyun-soo was riddled with bullets and collapsed, unconscious. Meanwhile, Eun-yu, determined to find Hyun-soo, forced two soldiers to drive her group back to the apartment complex, despite warnings from Jisoo that Hyun-soo might no longer be the person she remembered. Eun-yu insisted on seeing him herself. Returning to the ruined apartment, Eun-yu found Hyun-soo's glasses and a list of names documenting those who had turned into monsters. Her brother's name was among them. The evidence was undeniable. Overwhelmed, she accepted the truth that Hyun-soo had transformed. Elsewhere, the yellow-haired trainee proposed killing the two captured soldiers. One of the soldiers lied, claiming the army had developed a vaccine but had limited supplies. He suggested that survivors who rescued soldiers from armed criminals might be prioritized for the vaccine. Without hesitation, the selfish trainee grabbed Jisoo's hand. The yellow-haired trainee, whose poor judgment continued to create chaos, once again betrayed the group. Seizing the opportunity, the sergeant took control of the situation by grabbing the gun. When Eun-yu left the apartment building, the sergeant, still furious, caught her by the hair and struck her repeatedly. Exhausted from hitting her, the sergeant dragged Eun-yu outside, preparing to shoot her. Thankfully, Xiao Kan arrived just in time to stop him. Eun-yu narrowly escaped death as Xiao Kan reminded the sergeant that the fallen soldiers were members of the powerful corps, and their bodies were still warm. This meant the creature responsible for their deaths couldn't be far. Aware of the danger, the sergeant ordered Xiao Kan to tie up the group and leave them behind while he returned to the base. Xiao Kan reluctantly obeyed, but intentionally left the knots loose. giving them a chance to escape after he departed. Just as the group began to process their situation, a strange sound echoed from above. Moments later, a woman emerged, a familiar figure from the past. It was the woman who had once transformed into a giant infant in the first season. Her face was expressionless, and she walked past the group, ignoring their presence entirely. Filled with rage, rammed his vehicle into her, sending her crashing into the rubble. Still unsatisfied, he poured gasoline over her body, prepared to set her on fire. Xiao Kan intervened, attempting to stop the sergeant, but his protests were ignored. Before the sergeant could ignite the flames, an unexpected figure intervened. It was the long-eared monster from the first season. Despite previous battles, this resilient creature had survived. Xiao Kan prepared to fire at the creature but noticed a small boy silently signaling to him. The monster, blind but can hear, reacted to the faintest sound. Xiao Kan gestured for everyone to move quietly toward a nearby bus. Their steps were light, and they dared not make a sound. Suddenly, the buzzing of a drone above shattered the silence, drawing the monster's attention. Hearing a noise, the monster immediately extended its limbs, ready to attack the group. As chaos ensued, Xiao Kan directed everyone to move toward the bus while firing at the monster. Just as he attempted to escape toward the vehicle, two enormous eyes emerged from a nearby mound of dirt and coiled tightly around him. The yellow-haired trainee revived the bus engine, drawing the monster's attention. It smashed through the vehicle's walls, blocking their escape. Fortunately, the bus roared to life and threw the monster off as it sped away. Meanwhile, Xiao Kan, still ensnared by the monster's tendrils, managed to draw his knife and stab one of the creature's eyes with all his strength. The trainee tried to flee in the bus, but was stopped by Unyu, who insisted on waiting for Xiao Kan. However, the trainee overpowered Unyu and drove off. At the last moment, the monster's neck was severed by another creature that had been attracted by the commotion. Xiao Kan, now freed, hurled a rock at the new monster's sensitive ears, taking advantage of the distraction to dash toward the bus. He narrowly avoided the original monster's tail as it lashed out, jumping aboard just in time. Once on the bus, Xiao Kan regained control and managed to outsmart both creatures, throwing them off the vehicle. For now, the immediate danger was over. Hyun-soo, naked and helpless, was dragged into the alley and locked in a cage like a dog. With a sinister expression, Hyun-soo was taken to the center of the arena, expecting a brutal experiment. To his surprise, they simply threw down a tortured, half-dead creature. Before Hyun-soo could ask anything, a large amount of blood began pouring down from his head. Hyun-soo was covered in blood from head to toe, and the blood from the monster made his eyes unable to open. The blood monster reacted immediately to the smell of blood. The blood monster grabbed the blood creature by the neck with one hand, lifted it up, and then accelerated to slam it against the wall, delivering a full military-style attack to its head. This wasn't enough, and the monster ended up biting the creature's neck. Hyun-soo's eyes turned gray-white, and memories of the monster before its change flooded his mind. The blood monster, influenced by the blood, seemed to regain its sanity and knelt on the ground, howling in agony. Seeing that the monster had lost its experimental value, the researchers immediately came up with a flamethrower to destroy the failed experiment. Hyun-soo cried out for their help, and only at that moment did he understand. Even if one turns into a monster, the humanity within will not be completely erased, and Hyun-soo seemed to have the ability to awaken the monster's humanity. This result greatly satisfied Dr. Lin, as Hyun-soo was the perfect experimental material he had dreamed of. As Dr. Lin left the laboratory, he encountered a soldier trying to open the lab door, but his ID card lacked the necessary permissions. Dr. Lin immediately recognized that the soldier was actually a vigilante who had sneaked into the base. Dr. Lin claimed to be a friend of the vigilante's husband, saying that by following him, they would find the husband. Along the way, Dr. Lin warned the vigilante to mentally prepare herself. However, the vigilante wasn't interested in hearing Dr. Lin's words. She snatched Dr. Lin's ID card and entered the C5 experimental zone alone. When Dr. Lin turned around, he saw a group of soldiers approaching. Just as he was about to ask them why they were there, he was forcibly restrained. Sang-wook, who was arrested alongside Hyun-soo, was put into a body bag. His wounds showed no signs of healing, and though he was an infected special case, he had been shot dead. The scientists confirmed that he had no vital signs. This discovery puzzled the two scientists. Sang-wook unexpectedly opened his eyes again. By the time they had finished their discussion and were about to act, they found that the body inside the bag was gone. When one of the scientists looked down, a surgical knife had pierced his ankle, and the other who approached was also stabbed and fell to the ground. In a matter of moments, both scientists were dead. Sang-wook found a protective suit and put it on. Due to his broken legs, he couldn't walk, so he crawled forward with his arms. By the time Yuri arrived at the room looking for his fiancée, Sang-wook was already gone. Yuri looked at his fiancée, who was barely recognizable, and burst into tears. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. When she lifted his shirt, she found that his abdomen, which had been pregnant for less than 2 months, had swollen as if it had been pregnant for 3 years. The baby inside seemed like it was about to break free at any moment. Meanwhile, the fully restored Sang-wook tore through the walls, releasing all the imprisoned monsters. He was the king of this new era. Sang-wook found Hyun-soo, who had been held captive. Having saved him many times before, his patience had run out. This time, he would leave Hyun-soo to fend for himself in captivity. However, just as he turned to leave, Hyun-soo broke through the bulletproof glass and engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Sang-wook. Hyun-soo was timid when facing humans, but fought fiercely against his own kind. However, his combat abilities were still clearly inferior to Sang-wook's. As Sang-wook raised his left hand to end Hyun-soo's life, Hyun-soo's eyes suddenly turned pitch black. Hyun-soo's fallen angel form appeared once again in a stunning display. Sang-wook couldn't help but clap his hands in admiration. He hadn't yet experienced the true power of these black wings. Hyun-soo used his wings to deliver a massive blow, and Sang-wook was sent crashing into the wall. Sang-wook laughed loudly. Both of their attacks were ruthless and unrelenting. Sang-wook seized the opportunity, using a long weapon to trip Hyun-soo, then whipped him with a small whip. He had given Hyun-soo many chances before, but Hyun-soo's shoe had squandered them. Sang-wook was furious with Hyun-soo's repeated betrayals. This time, he would never trust him again. Sang-wook, watching for the right moment, dodged Hyun-soo's massive slap and then pierced Hyun-soo's kidney with his palm, pushing him against the doorframe. The doorframe restricted Hyun-soo's wings, preventing him from attacking. After struggling a few times, Hyun-soo's wings began to frozen. Meanwhile, Yuri, who had escaped from the base, arrived at a lake, but the intense pain from her abdomen left her unable to move further. She lay on the ice, took out a knife, and cut open her pants. She was about to give birth. Just then, the ice surface, affected by the explosion, cracked, and Yuri fell into the cold lake water. The blood dyed the lake around her red. Suddenly, something anticipated pulled Yuri toward the surface. When Yuri regained consciousness, the sight before her made her feel immense pain. She couldn't believe that the creature before her was her own child. On the 108th day of the monster outbreak, the last few survivors of country, under the leadership of the Crow Army, hid underground in a lightless space. Silly Big Guy arrived at a greenhouse garden. There, he found a bottle of herbicide and casually put it into his pocket. Soon after, he spotted a cute girl sleeping among the flowers. He thought about waking her up, but as soon as he touched her arm, all of his memories were instantly read by the girl. What the girl did remained unclear, but the silly Big Guy's gaze turned vacant. He repeatedly called out for his mother, and the arm he had touched the girl with began to rot mysteriously. Meanwhile, Eun-yu had escaped to an abandoned factory. The two young men quickly found her location, unaware that there were monsters hidden here. Suddenly, a girl appeared behind them. Little Mustache immediately fired his gun. As Eun-yu was crossing a narrow bridge, a small monster caused her to lose her balance and fall, knocking her unconscious. The timid boy didn't want to join Little Mustache in his evil actions, so he went to check on the girl's condition. Just then, The girl suddenly opened her eyes. She grabbed the timid boy's wrist and after a moment, released him. Shortly after, the timid boy seemed to change completely. He began to mock Little Mustache and challenge him without restraint. It wasn't until he killed his companion that Little Mustache finally calmed down, regretting his impulsive actions. Suddenly, the foolish boy, now acting strangely, stood up behind him. When Unyu woke up, it was already dark, and she found herself surrounded by multiple monsters. Unyu grabbed a cement block from the ground and used it to fend off the monsters as she climbed to higher ground in the factory. However, these monsters were quick and soon caught up, pinning her down. With her small frame, there was no way Unyu could push them off. Just as she was about to run out of energy and meet her end, the monsters on the stairs were suddenly eliminated. Grateful, Unyu didn't have time to think and saw the factory door open. When she rushed outside, the person who had saved her was already gone. Unyu believed it was her brother, who had turned into a monster, and she thought he had been protecting her all along. Who would have thought that, instead of calling her brother, Unyu called out for the strange girl and the little beast who had turned into a monster. Unyu urged the girl to get out of the way and was about to attack the little beast, but to her surprise, the girl actually controlled the little beast. The little beast obeyed the girl's command and pushed aside. This girl surprisingly had the ability to control monsters. The girl seemed to know who had saved Unyu. As Unyu tried to grab the girl, she was accidentally bumped into a car by a monster baby. The little girl in front of her seemed to be able to control the monsters. Refusing to give up, Unyu followed the girl, only to find the body of Little Mustache. After covering the body, Unyu left the place. Little did she know, 2 time travelers were hiding nearby, silently observing her actions. When Unyu ventured out of the safe camp again, she was spotted by Shao Kahn. Shao Kahn tried to stop her from leaving, and as the two argued, the mysterious girl reappeared before Unyu. Unyu immediately asked how she knew who she was and whether the person who had saved her was her brother. At the girl's invitation, Unyu reached out his hand. When she saw the person behind the girl, she couldn't believe her eyes. Unyu saw a familiar face, and in her shock, she wished to run and embrace them. The girl put on gloves and walked up to the familiar person, who took out a rope and tied the girl's hands, then turned and led her away. Unyu wanted to follow, but was stopped by Xiao Chan halfway. Meanwhile, in the past, Yuri had just given birth to a monster. The monster was pitch black and was turned away from the woman. She realized that the child in front of her was not a normal person. The sound of the baby crying made Yuri's knife freeze in midair. Yuri looked up and saw Hyun-soo, who had escaped from the base. She couldn't bring herself to kill her own flesh and blood, but she also couldn't raise the child, so she had no choice but to abandon the child right there. In the blink of an eye, the little monster had grown into a chubby little girl. Hyun-soo, who was also a monster, stayed by her side and took care of her. Yuri still struggled with her daughter's identity, unwilling to meet her. Finally, one day, Yuri made up her mind and appeared before her daughter. Yuri gently embraced her daughter. The girl appeared normal on the outside, but her growth rate was astonishing. She grew as tall as an ordinary child would in a year in just 1 week. Yuri and her daughter spent a period of ordinary but tense days together. The little girl happily grew up until that fateful day arrived. Due to a robbery, Yuri rushed her daughter back to the room and told her not to come out, before she engaged in a brutal fight with the robbers who had followed her. Despite Yuri's best efforts to resist, the little girl was discovered by one of the deranged robbers. After Yuri eliminated the robber in front of her and found a hidden handgun, she discovered that the little girl and the other robbers had already disappeared. Not far from the beach, the little girl had joined the group of 3 deranged robbers. By the time Yuri arrived, the little girl had been shot and was lying on the ground, black liquid covering her entire body. And when the little girl stood up, she had seemingly aged 3 years in an instant. The girl, now covered in strength, grabbed one of the robbers by the arm. The robber, controlled by the girl, lifted a nearby fat man, and in mere moments, the fat man died horribly. The remaining robber couldn't escape his fate either. The girl's eyes returned to their human form. Seeing her daughter completely transformed, Yuri could no longer deny it. Her child was a monster. Returning to the present, Yuri planned to lock her daughter up to prevent further contact with Unyu. The girl was furious with her mother's actions, feeling she was no different from the other humans. Yuri believed locking her daughter up was a form of protection, unaware that the one causing the most harm to her daughter was herself. In her anger, Yuri locked her daughter in a room and secured the door. After some time, Yuri was awakened by a thick smoke. The room where her daughter was locked had caught fire. She quickly opened the door and pulled her daughter out. At that moment, the monster baby, seeing the ship on fire, rushed to the ship to help the girl. Seeing the monster baby, Yuri wasted no time and attacked it with a weapon. The monster baby fled in panic, and Yuri chased after it with a gun. The girl loudly questioned Yuri, asking if all monsters were to be killed, even herself. These were thoughts that had been on Yuri's mind all along. She could never bring herself to kill her daughter. The girl fell into the river, and Yuri immediately jumped in after her, but couldn't find her. On the other side, Unyu, following instructions to find Yuri, arrived at a large hole. As Unyu turned around, she was pushed into the hole by the girl. In the next moment, a fallen angel-like figure of Hyunsu appeared. After confirming Unyu's safety, Hyunsu immediately intended to leave. Seeing this form of Hyunsu, Unyu finally realized that the person who had been secretly protecting her all along was the mutant standing before her. Hyunsu explained that they weren't strangers, which was why he had acted, and then he turned to leave. But that didn't stop Unyu from pressing forward. This time, the attack melted the front part of Enyo's shoe, clearly showing Hyunsu's determination to avoid further contact. Still, Unyu was not discouraged and attempted to step forward, only to be pulled back by a suddenly appearing homeless man. Hyunsu didn't offer any explanation and left with the girl. Hyunsu had been staying away from the girl to protect Unyu. As the girl had said, her home was burning in a raging fire. Yuri had fallen unconscious from inhaling too much carbon monoxide. The monster baby tried to extinguish the fire with its body, but nearly ended up being cooked alive. When Hyunsu arrived on the boat, the monster baby was lying unconscious from exhaustion. Hyunsu managed to reach Yuri and the monster baby in the final moments. After Unyu and the homeless man returned to the camp, they discovered Shao Kahn had fallen into a coma after consuming poisonous mushrooms. Luckily, the homeless man knew how to make an antidote. Hyunsu also brought the unconscious Yuri to the camp. Upon seeing Yuri, Unyu and Shao Kahn decided to take her inside for treatment. The homeless man, however, didn't trust humans and was unwilling to have any contact with the monsters. When he saw the man aiming a gun, Unyu immediately took Hani hostage, threatening the man to put down his weapon. Unexpectedly, Hani's martial arts skills came into play. Hani chose not to harm Unyu and, after throwing away the dagger, shouted for the homeless man to drive away. Next day, the girl decided to accompany Hyunsu to the hospital to see Yuri one last time. When they arrived, Yuri was already unconscious, unable to speak. The girl held her hand as she lay by the bed. After a moment, Yuri stopped breathing and lay motionless. The girl stepped out of the room. Just as she left, a bottle shattered in the room. Sensing something was wrong, Hyunsu rushed into the room, only to find Yuri lying motionless on the floor. It was revealed that the girl's plan to keep Yuri alive was to turn her into a monster. Yuri's transformation into a monster was evident as her one eye turned white with no emotion, while the other eye shed a single tear. As the transformed half of Yuri tried to attack, her normal side stopped her. Hyunsu told Unyu and Xiao Tan to leave and promised to handle Yuri on his own. Yuri gripped Hyunsu's neck with one hand. On the way to the car, her normal side continued to struggle to hold back the monster side of her, and Hyunsu's eyes turned white. He finally began to feel the inner world of Yuri. Hyunsu could see the desires of those who had transformed into monsters. He could witness the fantasies in which they lived, imagining that they were happy. But for Yuri, even in her fantasies, she was still deeply unhappy. Hyunsu wanted to free her from this misery. He pushed Yuri down a pit, which caused her to fall unconscious. Unyu planned to stay by his side until Hyunsu woke up. Shao Tan decided to return to the camp and continue fulfilling his duties as a soldier. When Hyunsu woke up, he appeared to have changed completely. His eyes, now a different color, Unyu immediately recognized that the man in front of him was no longer the kind-hearted Hyun-soo. In the green home apartment complex, a cracked monster egg birthed a man. A man resembling a white strip walked out of the building, and all the monsters instinctively revered him, overwhelmed by a deep fear. As the camera zoomed in, it was revealed that this man was Unyu's long-lost brother, Un-hyuk. The end. Thanks for watching. Please like and drop a heart for part 2. See you next time.